But on behalf of the EIS, can I extend a very warm welcome to you all to what this afternoon is the official launch of the PACT online professional learning module series and associated resources. We hope that in you being here today, you see yourselves as being part of a pact against poverty, the damage that it wreaks on young people's lives and on their education. Sorry, before we go any further, can I just ask everyone to make sure that they're on mute, please? Just so that we have really good sound quality for this afternoon. So if you aren't already on mute, can you pop yourselves on, and that way everyone should be able to hear. Still someone hammering away on their keyboards. That sounds a bit better now. Okay, thanks very much for that. So last year in reporting after a 2-week fact-finding mission to the UK, Professor Philip Alston, UN Rapporteur on Human Rights and Extreme Poverty, declared the child poverty brought about by UK government austerity policies not just a disgrace, but a social calamity and an economic disaster. I would imagine that everyone here would agree with that conclusion, and as well as feeling anger about the injustice that appears to have been quite willfully inflicted upon the poorest in our society, I'm sure we're all keen to do all that we can to change the tragic state of affairs that Philip Alston witnessed here in the UK in 2018. So you're all on mute. I know that for many of you this will be a wholly unnatural state, but I hope you can bear with it for the duration of this afternoon's event in the interest of sound quality. You can use the chat function if you'd like to share your thinking over the next hour or so, and the icon for the chat function should be at the bottom of your screens if your screen looks anything like mine. Equally, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask about PACT, or if you'd like to put questions to this afternoon's speakers, then again, please put these into the chat box too, and we'll try to pick these up at the appropriate points. Though you'll be on mute for the duration of the event, we hope that the social media savvy among you will be tweeting about it by using the hashtag EISLaunchPACT, and that was put into the email that was most recently sent to you about the joining details. So we encourage you to be as loud as you want this afternoon on Twitter, if not on the WebEx platform itself. And after today, we hope that you'll be shouting about PACT professional learning from the rooftops, encouraging and supporting people to get involved in whatever way you can in your respective professional roles, and maybe even getting involved yourselves. Speaking of roles, I'm Andrea Bradley, EIS Assistant Secretary. I have responsibility for education and equality matters within our union, and I've been working to design and support the development of what was formerly known, and not that catchily titled, as the EIS Scottish Government Equity Related Professional Learning Project, since its not so humble beginnings in the spring of 2017. You can see why the project's now called PACT. I say not so humble beginnings because the origins of the project are cited in the quite grandly titled International Summit on the Teaching Profession, the ISTP of 2017, which was focused on supporting teachers to achieve greater equity of outcome for young people who experience socioeconomic disadvantage. The summit itself was quite unusual as an event in education, because it's generally organised by the Office for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and Education International, which is the global foundation of teachers unions. A strict prerequisite of attendance at the summit by is on the basis that delegates are made up of government union representatives. And an outcome of this discussion is a stage the union
what do you think that getting a unit
and the Cabinet Secretary for Education representing Scotland among the four UK jurisdictions agreed to jointly develop a related CPE, evaluate professional learning. That official pact was what became what is now project, and what we're here talking about the pledge that was made with the Scottish Government at the 2017 ISTP, and hopefully Pauline, my colleague, is going to be able to seamlessly share with you of Larry's explanation about that.
From an EIS point of view, the agreement at the 2017 ISTP was a follow-on from the general commitment to working with the Scottish Government on the challenge of poverty in education. But we were looking more directly for a practical outcome to it. And given the work we had done already around professional learning through our Learning Reps network and through our Equality Reps network, the idea of developing similar approach, a similar style to teachers talking to teachers about how you address the impact of poverty seemed like a good practical outcome. And that was the genesis of the PACT project, developing resources so that professional learning opportunities could be offered to teachers and delivered by teachers around the challenges of poverty on attainment and more broadly on the well-being of young people in our schools.
So that's a useful bit of background for you on the origins of the project. And I should also tell you that it bears the quite unusual hallmark of having very close partnership between Scottish Government and professional associations. So the ISTP pledge was designed to have very concrete outcomes, as Larry said, a set of research-based resources and activities to support teachers in their professional learning around the impacts of poverty on the lives of children and young people, and thereby on their experiences of education and their outcomes. In the year or so following the 2017 ISTP, the EIS and Scottish Government worked together to make what was an initial agreement written on paper become that series of tangible actions around the set-up of the project and the building of a community of support around it. So key to this was the formation of our project advisory board chaired by Gillian Hamilton, who you'll hear from shortly, and the recruitment of project staff, Sandra Scott and Kate Laughlin, who you'll also hear from later. So our mission at that early point in the work was to research, design and set up a programme of professional learning for teachers across the country, to deepen understanding of the nature, causes and consequences of poverty, specifically the consequences for young people's participation in school education, and to create opportunities for exploration of the possible mitigations of the poverty impact upon education in terms of pedagogy, ethos and policy in our schools. And we sought to do that from the outset in the spirit of collaboration with our partners on the project, with our partners on the project advisory board, and with many partners beyond. So these were community partners, particular local authorities, and individual schools, among others. We're hugely grateful to everyone who's contributed to the PACT endeavour so far, and thank you to all of you who are here and those of you who are not. A bit more about that later. That same spirit of collaboration is evident in this virtual space this afternoon. It's lovely to see so many people from so many different contexts coming together out of a desire to act against poverty and to mitigate the damage that it does to young people's school education and to much more besides. With people joining us this afternoon from all over Scotland, from several sectors of education, from among our own EIS membership and from fellow trade unions, and from various anti-poverty and human rights organisations nationally. The number and variety of the individuals and organisations who've come together this afternoon is testament to the strength of the collective will that there is in Scotland to do all that can be done to maximise the capacity of our schools to limit the harm that low income and associated deprivation does to children and young people who live with it. It's also reflective of the range of partners who fed into the PACT work so far, and again, we're hugely grateful for that. That all of you have made time to be here this afternoon is a source of hope that we can act collectively in support of PACT professional learning as a circuit breaker, to use a topical phrase, to some of the harms brought about by poverty that we see in our schools. Of course, gathering virtually like this isn't our ideal scenario. We'd hope for us all to be together in real life, able to talk to one another face to face at an event like this over a cup of coffee or maybe even a glass of wine. Because we see this launch as being a celebration of how far we've come so far and of what's been promised for the future, as well as it being a statement of intent to work together on the professional learning front so that we can use PL as another weapon in our armoury against poverty. Our original plan for the project too was to deliver face-to-face professional learning, having trained a cadre of EIS equality and learning reps to do that, as Larry mentioned in the clip there. There would always have been an online version of the PL offer as well, but the pandemic has meant that the virtual learning offer has had to be our starting point for now, rather than an additional extra. So necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. The PACT project, with the help of the project advisory boards, has made a swift pivot and has begun offering professional learning to teachers online, and will be doing that for the foreseeable future, both through live interactive sessions and the provision of offline self-access materials so that teachers can make use of the professional learning resources anytime that they can and wish to do so. So COVID-19 might have halted face-to-face professional learning for now, but we won't be deterred longer term from meeting that particular objective. I've mentioned our project advisory board several times now and want you to have the opportunity to hear from them yourselves. With this in mind, I'd like to invite Gillian Hamilton, Chair of the PACT Project Advisory Board, to talk briefly to you about its work in advising, challenging and supporting us, and in helping us to shape what has become the PACT PL offer today. So over to you, Gillian. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And you know, we all have, you know, when you're all about to speak, you all have that slightly excited feeling. The technical hitches at the beginning did nothing to help that slightly excited feeling. But genuinely, I'm really pleased to be asked to say a few words this afternoon. It's a real privilege for me, a real genuine privilege to chair the PACT Advisory Board, and I'm going to speak just a wee bit about that this afternoon. But I think for all of us on the Advisory Board, and you will hear from my colleagues, as Andrea says, through the course of this afternoon, this is a real landmark moment for us in terms of the launch of the modules and this stage of the work. So it is really exciting. And Andrea, you're spot on. At the beginning of this, at the inception of the programme, we didn't ever envisage that this would be an online launch and an almost total online delivery. It wasn't part of the original thinking or aspiration at all. And as you were saying, and as Larry flagged in the video there, it was born from a joint commitment from the Deputy First Minister, from Scottish Government, and from Larry at an international summit of the teaching profession. And it was groundbreaking and is groundbreaking for a professional learning development piece of work to be that strong collaboration between Scottish Government and a professional association. And in the words of the project itself, it's a real joint initiative for us collectively. And when I say us collectively, you were talking there, Andrea, about people joining this afternoon from all across Scotland. And when I say a joint initiative of all of us collectively, I'm including all of us in that ask, I guess, to deliver that equity-related professional learning on a national scale. And the fact that we're all here this afternoon and that we're all supporting this work, I think reaffirms Andrea's words there, that every one of us has a shared ambition beyond the programme itself. We have a strong moral purpose and a commitment to Scotland's young people, to empower Scotland's schools and Scotland's teachers in minimising the damage that poverty does to education and life chances of too many of Scotland's young children. And as I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, it is a real privilege for me to chair this advisory board. And when Andrea asked me to do it, I remember feeling, I've talked twice today there about nervousness, but I remember when Andrea asked me, it was over a coffee at the Scottish Learning Festival. And the moral of the story is when Andrea says, can I buy you a coffee? It's because she wants something. It's not just because she wants to buy you a coffee. And when she explained her ask and what she was looking for, I remember thinking that I wasn't actually sure that I could take this role on, because the advisory board itself is made up with colleagues with such extensive knowledge and experience from across the system. And I've been humbled by the input across the advisory board with that collective commitment and shared knowledge, working with colleagues from local organisations, from national organisations, from Scottish Government, from universities, all with this shared commitment that I've just outlined there. And I've learned so much being a member of the advisory board. It's a real honour to chair this work. And it has been, and it continues to be, an absolute collective endeavour from the board members and from the PACT team. We've kept a sharp focus on the purpose of the work and on the potential of the work. And I know in my conversations with Kate and Sandra, who you're going to hear from this afternoon, I know they've really appreciated that collective challenge and support. We've had a number of conversations as a project board about the ambition of the project, and it absolutely is ambitious, and you'll hear more about that today, but also just making sure that we stick to that brief of this work, because there's so much work that could and should and can be done. So, and on that note, I'm talking about us as an advisory board and our commitment, but this work couldn't have happened or progressed without the work of the PACT team. And when we talk about the PACT team, I think it sometimes sounds as though you've got a whole machine behind this work. But the reality is this is a tiny project team who have taken forward a really significant commitment. And if I started by saying that as an advisory board, we're really excited about this launch today, I'm thinking that Kate and Sandra must be so excited and passionate about having got the work to this stage, about the springboard for where it will go and where it can go next. And Kate and Sandra, I just want to say a few personal words on behalf of the board to you, because we have been really inspired and continue to be inspired by your energy, by your commitment, and for your clear passion for the importance of this work. It's kept us on our toes throughout these PACT Advisory Board conversations, so I'd like to say a really big thank you. The modules that are being launched today, and as Andrea was saying and I said already, there was always a plan for an online element, because that's a really important and sustainable part of this work. But Kate and Sandra, you did have to pivot to make it much more of an online element initially than you would have planned. But I've been really impressed by the fact that the modules that are being launched and the programme itself is really underpinned, not just by the work of this small team, but by extensive research, by extensive collaboration, and by testing and continued discussion with teachers. And Larry talked in his video about this work being for teachers, with teachers, and that's been at the heart of the development of this work, through involvement of EIS colleagues, through EIS learning reps, and through the wider profession as this work has been developed. So, as I said, on behalf of the board, Kate and Sandra, Andrea and Lee, who keeps me right in terms of the meetings and the events, it is a massive thank you. I've mentioned the word potential already, and I think that this work has enormous potential to make a difference to young people in Scotland and to support Scotland's teachers to make that difference. To make that happen, it needs to be a continued collective endeavour. It's not the work of the team taking it to this next stage. It's all of us supporting the work of the team to take it to that next stage. And I think that if we get that right, then the difference that this work can make to Scotland's young people with a continued collective endeavour is indeed a pact for Scottish education, and a pact that we should be proud of. Thank you, Andrea.
Thanks very much, Gillian, for those words of encouragement and for that rallying cry to everyone here at the end. And can I just assure everyone that every cup of coffee doesn't have an ask at the end of it. Sometimes a coffee is just a coffee, but Gillian's absolutely right. On that occasion, there was an ulterior motive, and I was delighted that she was wooed by the cafe latte and said yes to chairing the board. As Gillian's pointed out, though, the board is a collective. You can see here from the list of members, the span and the breadth of expertise that we have on it, and the range of different partners, and we have hugely benefited from their experience, their wisdom, and their particular perspectives over the last couple of years as the work around the project has been shaping. So thanks to every single one of them. And although you've heard from Gillian today, I should let you know that over the last couple of weeks there's been a series of conversations underway involving members of the Project Advisory Board, and they're available, or they're going to be available later on this afternoon as a series, so you will be able to hear more from individual members of the advisory board than we've been able to squeeze into this afternoon's programme, and little sort of like snippets, little clips of perspective from each of them as well, and that bank of video resources will continue to be added to over the next little while. So, you know, just to pick up from what Gillian was saying there, I would also like to thank the Project Advisory Board for all that they have done over the past couple of years and the generosity of spirit with which they have given their time and their, you know, everybody, as we know in Scottish education, is really pushed for time and also within third sector organisations, but there has always been a willingness to attend meetings, to give, you know, time to attend, but also that offer of support between meetings as well. And Sandra, Kate and myself have been hugely grateful for that, and long may it continue over the next little while. I'm now going to invite EIS Equality Committee convener Nicola Fisher to share her insights as a citizen, as a teacher and as an EIS activist on the impact of poverty in education and on what PACT Professional Learning offers teachers in trying to overcome this. Thanks, Nicola.
Thank you, Andrea. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you for attending this launch today of the PACT project. And thank you too to everyone who's worked so hard and with such dedication to bring the project to fruition, especially the work most recently to bring it into its new online incarnation. When I was asked to speak today, I was asked to include some reflections on my own experience of growing up in poverty. So at various times over the last few weeks, I've turned this over in my mind and considered what I might or might not include. And in doing so, I got quite a surprise one day. I grew up during the mass poverty of the 1980s, and those of you familiar with those times will remember only too well how grim it was. During that time, when I was about 7, there was a period when my mum and I, having returned to Glasgow from living in Dundee after the death of my grandmother, were staying with various friends of my mum in various parts of Glasgow. Some of you may be familiar with some of these places. We stayed in Bank Street, we stayed in South Park Avenue, we stayed in Belmont Street. One flat we stayed in had no electricity because that friend hadn't paid the bill, but it did have lots of mice and the candles were quite atmospheric, so I suppose that was something. While staying there, we nearly lost the small amount of furniture we owned when sheriff officers came round to conduct a warrant sale for the unpaid bills, and wouldn't believe the furniture did not belong to the recalcitrant bill-paying friend of my mum. I think a whip round amongst other friends eventually saved the furniture, and in later years, if you looked in the back of the wardrobe and the chest of drawers and underneath the coffee table, you could still see the lot numbers chalked on the wood. At a different time, we were staying in a different friend's bedsit, with a friend sleeping in the bed and my mum and I sleeping on the 2 couches. We stayed in these places for months at a time. And it was while I was thinking about all that a couple of weeks ago, one day when I was walking along to get my bus to work, I actually stopped in the street because I realised that we had in fact been homeless. But it took me until a few weeks ago to actually realise that that was the word for it. It took me 42 years to give it a name. Up until then, I just used to think that we stayed with friends. But you would surely only stay with friends in these pretty dreadful circumstances if you literally had nowhere else to go. And what that illustrated for me is the way in which poverty becomes normalised for the children living in it. Outlandish and dreadful situations become normal and become part of daily life. Children adapt to and accept situations which are not remotely acceptable. In the UK, instead of making progress on poverty and child poverty in particular, Tory austerity has ensured that more and more children are living in truly desolate and devastating circumstances. The Child Poverty Action Group, which, as you know, does so much fabulous work to try and argue the case for the children of our country who live in poverty, have some quite alarming statistics to share. There were 4.2 million children living in poverty in the UK in 2018 to 19, which represents 30% of children, or 9 children in every classroom of 30. 44% of children living in lone parent families are in poverty. Lone parents face a higher risk of poverty due to the lack of an additional earner, low rates of maintenance payments, gender inequality in employment and pay, and childcare costs. Children from Black and minority ethnic groups are more likely to be in poverty. 46% are now in poverty, compared with 26% of children in white British families. Work does not provide a guaranteed route out of poverty in the UK. 72% of children growing up in poverty live in a household where at least one person works. And children in large families are at a far greater risk of living in poverty. Colleagues, children are hungry. Children are cold, even in their own homes. children may experience homelessness in one form or another, and they experience enormous psychological damage from the impact of living in poverty. Children cover up the fact that they live in poverty. I know we did. Children hide it from their teachers and their friends and their peers. Children come to school and worry about their parents. They soon realise that money is hard to come by and bills are difficult to pay. In my house growing up, we were schooled very, very thoroughly by our mum not to open the door. Don't open the door if somebody knocks, in case it's a TV licensed man, because we can't afford to have a TV licence. In case it's the SS, now known as the Benefits Agency, in case they want to come round and see if we were cheating to get our benefits. And even to this day, when my door goes, if I'm not expecting somebody, a bit of me stops and wonders who it is on the other side of that door. And if parents are worried and stressed and distressed by poverty and its impact, you can be sure that trickles down to the children. It is the one trickle-down effect in our economy which actually exists. Economic conditions have also pushed many working families below the breadline, and it is a disgrace that so many people in the UK live with in-work poverty, 0 hours contracts and precarious employment. Over the last 10 years, we have seen successive Tory policies which have pushed the children in this country further and further into poverty. Universal credit, the bedroom tax, the benefits cap and the so-called rape clause have all served to slash household incomes to the great detriment of the children living in those families. And the latter policy in that list has always seemed to me, at least, one of the greatest injustices served on the children in this country. To tell a child that they are less deserving of financial support than their older brothers and sisters, just because of their place in the family, just because they are the third child, seems particularly cruel. Does child 3 not also need to eat? Does child 3 not also need shoes? Does child 3 not also need clothes and a warm home? And by depriving child 3, of course, it also serves to deprive child 1 and 2, when already scarce resources have to be spread even thinner. In our family, we would have been in big trouble as we had a child 3, 4 and 5. And unfortunately for the children in our schools today, the coronavirus pandemic is likely to serve to increase and deepen poverty in the country. Redundancies, the end of furlough scheme, the risk to businesses across the country will push more of our families into poverty and exacerbate it for those already living on or below the breadline. The impact of poverty on education is well known, colleagues. The University of London's Institute of Education found that persistent poverty damages young children's cognitive development to the extent that they will rank 10 levels below a child who has no experience of poverty. A Save the Children report contained analysis which showed that around 50% of educational equality in the UK is a direct result of differences in income, and that inequality begins early. Various studies demonstrate that children from poor families are likely to show lower levels of attainment by the age of 2. By the age of 6, a less able child from an affluent family will have overtaken a more able child from a poor family. And this is why initiatives such as the PACT project, and on a much larger scale, the measures to close the attainment gap, are so crucial if we are to prevent poverty continuing to destroy and limit the lives of children. As many of you know, colleagues, for years the EIS has campaigned on poverty and child poverty and has worked with teachers, with schools, with councils, with national government to advance the agenda, to push for change and to fight for our children and young people. Teachers know only too well the impact of poverty. They are only too aware. They see it in their classrooms every single day. In the EIS, we have campaigned on issues such as child hunger. We have campaigned on issues such as uniform, when schools were tempted to have more and more elaborate uniform and tartan pinafores and braiding on the blazers. And we've worked hard to raise awareness of why, although that may give a sense of cohesion within the school, the impact that might have on our families is disproportionate. We have campaigned on period poverty. We have campaigned on equipment and resources. We have spoken about how important it is to remember that not every family has equal access to technology, that tech poverty is a real issue for our children and families, that if you're into your emergency credit on your card meter, will you choose to cook the dinner that night, or will you choose to charge up a laptop if you even have one? Child poverty casts a long shadow. Poverty blights people's lives, it limits life choices, it destroys people's mental and physical health, and ultimately, poverty kills. It might just take a while to do it. But the impact of poverty on life expectancy is nonetheless well known. And if we want a different future from that rather bleak one, for the children in front of us today, and for their children, and for their children too, then we need to reduce the impact of poverty on education, but we also need to fight tooth and nail to eradicate poverty in our society.
Nicola, thanks so much for that. That was a really expansive, powerful, moving contribution there. You see lots of comments in the chat there that are resonating with what I've said. Thank you so much for that. We're now going to move to just a little clip of film from two PACT learners, two teacher voices, who will give a little bit of insight into what the PACT professional learning has meant for them so far.
As teachers, we need to support families and children to mitigate against the effects of poverty, and at the same time, we need to understand and change systemic and structural elements to ensure equity and equality. PACT training focuses and delivers this two-pronged approach. It is a mix of theory, which will lead to reflective self-evaluation, and it offers practical strategies to put in place to bring about long-term positive culture change.
Poverty affects more than 1 in 5 people in Scotland. With the current climate, it's vital we understand what poverty does to our learners. Changing our language around poverty is a beginning. Putting into place poverty statements and policies in our schools will help us on the road to ensuring our learners have what they need to succeed. Poverty kills hope. Let's move forward, take the step and give them the equitable experience they deserve so they can aspire to the future they dream of.
And thanks to Nikat and Ruth for their insights there. Can I just ask everyone to check, please, that they are on mute? And if they aren't, if you could pop yourselves on, that would be really helpful. Thank you very much. So that the COVID-19 pandemic has prevented a face-to-face launch of PACT PL, it really is the least of our concerns in terms of the harm that the pandemic has brought and continues to bring on our poorest citizens. The associated economic impact poses a real and significant danger to many more whose income levels and financial security up until now have enabled decent lives for them and their families and supported their children to be able to participate fully in all that school education has to offer. This pandemic seems to have stalked its victims like the most cunning and vicious of predators and savaged the lives of the most vulnerable and the least able to escape or to protect themselves. In 2017, Larry and the DFM took the first important step towards making the professional learning that we're focusing on today a priority. Now it's an absolutely urgent priority. The need for it, though hard to believe, is even more acute than it was 3 years ago. Schools and teachers are having to steel themselves for another tidal wave of poverty when the system, which was only just beginning to recover from the last one, when the system was only just beginning to recover from the last one, which was prompted by the 2008 recession and the subsequent more than a decade of austerity. As Nicola said, the moral imperative to act is striking in its urgency, and as Gillian said too, PACT PL is more relevant and necessary now than ever before. With that thought, I'll pass you over now to our two PACT co-leaders, Kate Laughlin and Sandra Scott, who'll present jointly with the aim of conveying to you more about the intent, ethos and content of the PACT professional learning offer. Remember to use the chat function if you have questions, particular questions about the content of PACT as Kate and Sandra are presenting. So over to you both now, starting with Kate. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to Gillian and to others for your kind words. I'm struggling a wee bit to regain my equilibrium after listening to Nicola's words, because it resonated so much with many experiences from my own childhood as someone who grew up and lived in poverty, and particularly the bit about not opening the door. Way back in 1999, I was part of a Communities Against Poverty delegation to the fledgling Scottish Parliament, a delegation that Bill Scott, who I think is also here today, was also part of, And I talked about that very thing of being brought up afraid to open the door, and my commitment, my determination that no matter what happened, that I wouldn't be asking my children to do the same. But as a single parent at that time living on income support, that was hard. So thank you very much for that, Nicola. And I just wanted to relate back that really resonated with me. So our presentation today, as co-leaders of this amazing project, is called Poverty, People, Places and Power. I'm doing the first section and Sandra will be doing the second in a wee while. This division of labour, to use a good trade union term, reflects the two-pronged approach of PACT: to research and gather evidence, to investigate and discuss the big picture issues, and to use that to underpin practical action and cultural change in schools. Today, I'm going to concentrate most on the PACT bigger picture, to further contextualise where we are now. And in the midst of all the doom and gloom, unfortunately, often realistic doom and gloom for many, to honour the intent behind the project, to celebrate arriving at this stage, and to share the joy inherent in feeling the potential that this project has to support real change in poverty in Scotland's schools, even in these dark times. When I originally applied for this post, as a long-term anti-poverty educator, researcher, practitioner, activist and campaigner, and sometimes all at once, who's been round the kind of rhetoric versus reality block so many times, I was so excited about the potential to generate real change in poverty this project promised. And I'm here today, as we officially launch our programme, to tell you that I'm still excited about its potential for real change. Let me tell you a bit more about the values and ethos that underpin our project, to add to what's already been said. This is reflected in the title of our joint presentation today. Could you bring in the first slide, please? Thank you. So poverty, people, power and places. As you would expect from an education-based project, we think that words really matter, that language and the story we tell about ourselves, our schools, our society matters. And in this time of untruths, confusion for many, and social and emotional isolation for many too, we think that saying it like it is matters, and that's reflected from the start in the title of this presentation. You've heard how essentially people, places, and just power built this project. More people, places, and different kinds of diverse power have got us to where we are now. And more of each together are needed to get us to where we want to be. And our young people need us to do that. And each of these things particularly matter to and for our young folk, who need us to stand firmly on the side of calling out the problem, helping them to name it, and in turn, offering them the educational tools and resources to hold their head up and steer their way through it in these troubled times. We aim to offer teachers the awareness-raising support, tools and resources to allow them, you, to do that in turn. To paraphrase a Facebook post we've quoted before, teaching our learners the critical analysis and debating skills needed to argue whether it is raining or not surely must rest on the clincher of teaching them how to look out of the window and trust what they see for themselves, and to be able to describe it, to know what it means, and crucially, what they can possibly do about it. It is people, of course, who help them do that. Our professional learning programme is particularly aimed at teachers, but it is open to anyone working in the field who thinks they may benefit from it, needs to know what we have to say, and wants to be part of the community, the PACT community, we want to build here in Scotland. It is people who build the kinds of relationships that change lives, and we know that good teachers have a particular role to play in doing so. However, many other people are important too. Of course, parents and families principally, but we in PACT also emphasise the importance of the communities in which our young people live, the communities that do or do not support them at the moment. Which brings us to the next of our keywords today, places. And strangely enough, I'm not going to mention schools first. I'm going to state for emphasis what seems another obvious truth. Young people live in families and in communities, foremost, anchored in a physical place. The places that are our schools are not only physically anchored in that, but we know need not only to be seen but also felt as part of the fabric of that place. If our young people, specifically those living in poverty, are not to feel that they lead some kind of cognitively dissonant or split lives, and you can hear the psychologist in me coming out there. Of course, this is particularly true for those young people who live in areas of multiple deprivation, but poverty is everywhere. And we know that most young people who live in poverty live in areas where deprivation is not so visible. And for those young people, belonging wears a different face, but is no less important. As reflected also in some of the contributions from our project advisory board members that you will be able to access after the event, we want to support the development and deepening of a consciousness that really values and instills a sense of place in our young people, that anchors them and supports a sense of pride in where they live and of being part of the people who live there. Why? Because evidence shows that it's necessary for good mental health, for a positive sense of identity, and even for the development of a coherent sense of self and of a positive life narrative going forward. Teachers here today, and perhaps particularly school leaders, may be thinking, well, we already do that, and that is to be celebrated also on this day of celebration. However, there is always more to learn about the communities in which our young people live their lives. For example, how many of us know about the grassroots work, anti-poverty work, that goes on day in and day out in the next, often below the radar of the forums we sit in and the networks we're part of? Do we really know who is helping our young people and their families to get through these hard times? Which brings me on to the third word here, power. You no doubt have heard of the saying, speaking truth to power. Well, PACT supports that and aims to support teachers, to support young people to do that. Let us lay out our stall even more clearly. Could we have the next slide, please? And the next part, please. PACT names poverty firmly as the problem under discussion here. The systemic problem, not our young people, not their families, not their communities. We start by naming the use and misuse of power as the root cause of poverty. It's not an individual choice, but results from systemic and political choices that create and then trap people in poverty. We know other choices can be made, and as Andrea has already mentioned, agree with Professor Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur, in particular when he said of the government's record in poverty, the UK government's record in poverty, because of course it is at the UK level that much of the overarching relevant policy levers still lie, that poverty in the UK is an ideological choice, and a choice that is playing out before our eyes today more visibly than ever. May we have the next slide, please? As you know already, we examine the nature of poverty. What is it, and does it always wear the same face? The causes of poverty, we've referred to that already, and the consequences of poverty. What does it actually do to our young people? And with greater understanding of the nature of this beast comes greater power to create change. Sandra will tell you more about how these are going to be delivered in our modules in the next part. Cultural change within our schools is something that we are committed and aiming to create. And cultural change that, while opening the school door even wider to the community, shuts it firmly when poverty constantly tries to sneak in. We have 3 starting premises for our work with you. If we could see the next slide, please. I'll read these one at a time. So, teachers desire to know and do more about poverty. We'll have the next, please. The need for shared understandings and concepts and a common language for effective collegiate working. And the next, the relevance and utility of a human rights approach. So on the first, we know this because teachers have told us so. On the second, we've already talked about the importance of a shared language and narrative, and you will hear much more about that as our modules progress. And on the third, let's also set our stall out here on this one. The PACT project proudly takes a human rights-based approach to poverty. May we have the next slide, please? So, you've heard a lot about international law-breaking recently in relation to bills that are going through the UK Parliament. Please do join us in our modules and hear more about legally binding treaties, legally binding international law that the UK government has signed up to that make that statement on the screen more than just rhetoric. I wish we had more time to talk about that today, but we will talk more about that as the modules progress. Human rights are not optional, as the picture just coming up. We'll see. Really like to get some of these badges printed. So we call this part of our work the Convention of the Rights of the Child and Beyond, maybe a bit like a human rights Star Trek. So in summary, we know teachers and schools can't stop poverty, but there are many things we can do to mitigate its effects. And PACT professional learning is designed to support teachers, school leaders, and our education professionals to do just that. And to remind you once more why this is needed, may we have the next slide, please. Being a teenager at this time is hard. I have had to grow up so fast. I worry about how my mum and I are going to make our money last just a little bit longer. About how if I have a bag of sweets now, it means we can't have a jug of milk later. I have such terrible guilty feelings. I'm hungry, but I don't want to have to eat so much because she's hungry too. And that's a young person's quote that's taken from research conducted by one of our community partners, the Poverty Truth Community, earlier this year. So now we want to play you a short film that also builds on more of what young people have to say. It's one of a series of films that we're planning to produce that I've already started work on, called PACT Voices. So here is the first. Thank you, if you could play the film, please.
It's like a big issue because like there's like a lot of people in poverty and like the teachers don't really know who's in poverty because like they could act different in school and then be like different in the house, and that like some people can struggle and then like the teachers might start shouting at them, but like they don't really know why it's happening and like how they're in the house, and like it was just bad, and the teachers should really like kind of like understand and like help them a bit. I think school should help them a bit as well because like they can't always focus on their learning if like the house is like not that great and if they're living in poverty.
I had the form right and I had to go up with a teacher to stamp it. And I didn't want to. Like, I genuinely did not want to go up and ask this teacher because it's embarrassing. Do you know what I mean? Like, so the fact that I had to actually go up and say, right, and I had to get my target grades to put on the sheet to fill in. So I had to go ask another teacher if I can get the, and he's like, why? And I was like, to fill in the EMA form, and it's like, do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's more embarrassing rather if they just sent out and then you could just fill it in. You didn't need to get a teacher to sign it or. I mean, I get why you need a teacher because for the school, but I don't think you should.
I think they should be lobbying the head and the like pastoral sense of the school to do more about it, to talk to people, to make people talk to them about what's happening at home.
Maybe just like sit down, have a chat, have a laugh. Maybe like even like if you see them in general, like give them a hug or something. Even like high five won't hurt. Even talk to the school about it and see what they can do, even because I think that'll help a lot.
Maybe just to, listen to people's, and that we can, that if we get more awareness, and even if it's small awareness in schools, we can grow in it and develop it, and it will maybe hopefully become less of an issue if we just become more aware of it.
I just think that people living in that situation, I think living like that's already stressful enough, and that although if you don't really want to treat people specially, because they may think that's they're getting special treatment because of that circumstance, but it's a bit extra harsh if you go like, if there's things that they can't get to. So like, just even like going back to the stationery, stuff like that, that's quite hard in a student. Even just something small like that, you're like quite let down if you couldn't afford that. And when you see, although it's always great if you're getting school trips, if you see other people going on school trips like the USA trip or the London trip or Lyon, it's quite a letdown if you can't get to go, if you can't afford that as well. Although that's obviously not a teacher's fault or anything like that, but that's definitely a big like letdown for them as well. It's just stuff like that. It's really just little things across it can put them down that wee bit extra more and make stuff more stressful for them, which then makes their school life no very good. They're like don't want to come to school, they rather not, they maybe don't talk to their friends as much. So just overall the wee things do impact to one big thing, and that's just really the impact of poverty.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm sure you'll agree that the pupil comments were very powerful. And so now we're going to change the focus a bit from pupil voices to teacher experience. Now that Kate shared with you the underpinning principles of PACT's work, I'm going to expand on the offer of learning that we're making to the profession. So over the past 23 months, Kate and I have been immersed in the world of teacher professional learning. And through research and collaboration with partners, and most importantly of all, listening to teachers, we've learned what works and what doesn't. We've considered the true purposes of this learning. We've developed the PACT methodology and learned from EIS colleagues, members, partners, and the Project Advisory Board. We facilitated anti-poverty professional learning for many different audiences, and some of you here today might be able to spot yourselves in the selection of the highlights there. We've also moved our professional learning online and facilitated modules and self-access resources. And, you know, as we've said already, of course, the professional learning landscape is different now. And the learning itself is more important than ever. But of course, the way we access it is different, and that brings its own advantages and disadvantages. So that's the overview. And now I'd like to take you into the specifics of our 3 core modules, starting with the themes that underpin them all. Next slide, please. So, as with poverty itself, the themes are seemingly simple, but they reflect a complex reality. All of the PACT themes come with shared assumptions. Teachers want to know more and do more about poverty. And of course, teachers cannot solve poverty, but what they can do is make a difference. So our themes are understanding poverty better, the human rights approach to poverty, pedagogical approaches to mitigating the impact of poverty, and creating a whole school anti-poverty culture. So on the next slide, let's have a look at the first module. We've called this module Understanding Poverty, How It Is. So I'll just give you a few moments to look over the main points of the content there. And in this module, we'll focus on what poverty is and is not by examining its nature, causes and consequences, and citing it firmly within its political and ideological context. We shine the spotlight on attitudes, beliefs and myths about poverty, inequality and wealth.
And in doing so, the module develops the role of poverty-related pedagogy within Curriculum for Excellence and explores what more we can do to translate theory into practical action by sharing research evidence, experience, insights, and good practice. In addition, through our human rights-based approach to poverty, we provide an opportunity to learn more about human rights education on economic, social, and cultural rights, and the governmental responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfil them. And I'd just like to illustrate this module for you now. The following images capture the many faces of poverty. Next slide, please. So here you see the many faces of poverty: rural, urban, hidden, and visible. On the next slide, we'll look at the second module. And this one is digging deeper on poverty, how it feels, and what it does. So again, I'll just let you read these over for yourselves. And as I've already said, poverty is both complex and simple. We further explore its essence and its many faces through examining a range of potential impacts on both learners as individual young people and as members of families, communities, and wider society. We utilise case studies and lived experience as well as concepts from the research, not only educational research, but also sociology and psychology. And we explore the issues of poverty, wealth and inequality, identity, stigma and shame, risk and uncertainty, and a range of the potential impacts on learning. We look at the practical examples of what poverty does to mental health and to lives, and at how teaching and learning about poverty together has the potential to empower teachers and learners in mitigating some of these impacts. The module also draws on case studies and academic research to learn more about a human rights approach to poverty. And we'll examine how human rights education can be used to strengthen the links between existing educational frameworks and social justice initiatives in schools. So just to firmly ground all of this in reality, let's remind ourselves of how poverty feels from the perspective of a Primary 6 participant in Child Poverty Action Group's Cost of the School Day research. On the next slide. When you're poor, you give up on your dreams. So on the next slide, we'll look at the final module, Schools Against Poverty, the Art of the Possible. And this module looks to the future with a sense of hope. It builds on the work done so far, both within the programme and within each teacher's existing practice and ongoing school actions. For example, on the cost of the school day, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, pupil voice, parental involvement, and community outreach. We consider a wide domestic and international evidence base to discuss and examine what else could be done within schools to mitigate the effects of poverty on learners and their educational potential. We reflect on current and emerging statutory and good practice guidance, frameworks and policies, and we explore their relevance and usefulness for Scotland's learning communities. We recognise diversity both within the profession and within schools, and this module will also provide the opportunity for discussion and reflection and enable each participant to identify ongoing priorities for self-directed professional learning, including offering further support through ongoing involvement in the PACT community. So as part of our ongoing professional learning events, we've been asking participants to send a message to the system about poverty. So on the next slide, we'll look at a selection of those. I'll just let you look at those for a moment. I think someone in the audience will definitely spot themselves here. So on to our final slide now. So you'll see here from one of our events, this is Joe Kirby from the Northern Alliance. And she's making the claim, let's smash the barriers to learning that poverty creates. So what are we asking of you who are here with us for the launch today? Well, that depends very much on your role. If you're a head teacher, a teacher, or anyone else who's school-based, firstly, sign up for the modules if you haven't already done so. You can find the link on our website. Start a conversation about poverty in your own setting. Listen to your learners and to their families. Open up to your community. Make links with local anti-poverty organisations and activists. School empowerment supports all of these actions. If you're someone who supports teachers to access their professional learning, maybe you're in a local authority or a regional improvement collaborative, support your schools to do all of the above. Spread the word in the strong networks you've already developed. Give people the time and space to focus on anti-poverty professional learning. It's needed more than ever now as we live through this pandemic. If you're in initial teacher education, spread the word amongst your students and colleagues. Self-access materials are available in addition to the facilitated sessions. ITE students need to be poverty aware so that they can make a difference as NQTs and early career teachers. If you're not in teaching and you're supporting people in poverty in some other way, for example, if you work in a third sector organisation or are a human rights defender or anti-poverty activist, we're asking you to spread the word in your community. Be open to approaches from your local schools and listen to young people and make sure their voices are heard by others. Thank you.
Sorry about that, everyone. I was stuck on mute for a bit there. I was clicking and clicking, but nothing was happening. Thank you, Kate and Sandra, for that. I hope that's provided people a really strong flavour of what is actually in the PACT professional learning offer. And we're going to move on now just to a very brief question and answer session. One of the questions that came into the chat, and which I was going to cover later, was in relation to access to the modules. You maybe see from the chat box there that put up for the materials are now available for Module 1 in COVID-19 context. So that material is now online and accessible through the link that has been put into the chat. But after the event, we will send out an email to you all, providing the various links that you will need to access hereafter. In terms of the remainder of the module series, the next module is going to be run on Wednesday the 28th and Friday the 30th of October, with Module 3 and 4 coming mid-November and early December after that. But as I said, we will email out that information after the event is over. In the meantime, we have maybe a couple of talking points that have come up from the chat box. One of them is in relation to the human rights dimension of the project being a game changer. And I wonder if members of what are going to be our panel would have any comments to make in relation to that, the particular emphasis within human rights and what difference that might make to to the work going forward. So is any of the speakers, so Kate, Sandra, or maybe Nicola, maybe would want to say something in response to that? Kate, on you go.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had difficulty unmuting there. Well, absolutely. I mean, it totally is a game changer. As someone who spent several years actually researching this and trying to find my own way through the confusion that is human rights, and particularly around poverty, it is no surprise that to find that many people very well committed and intelligent and informed people still do not understand the human rights landscape around poverty. And from my own point of view, I would argue that that seems to be quite a deliberate thing. So it's a game changer because for two reasons, really. Because it transforms people living in poverty from people who are seen as the object of charity to people who are rights holders. It also transforms governments and associated bodies into duty bearers. And if we cite that in the context of the conversations that go on around poverty at the moment and around the provision of public services and government's responsibilities, that is indeed a game changer. But importantly also, as we're working with young people in our schools and we're incorporating the rights of the child into our work, then there are two important things to bear in mind then as well. Young people, as we know, don't live in a vacuum. So young people can look around them and see, even if they don't articulate in this way, that the human rights of their parents, of their families and their communities have been violated. So there is a contradiction there inherent in teaching our children that they have all sorts of appropriate rights, but that they can see that as young people living in families, that those rights don't translate outside the school. And the second thing is, of course, that today's children are tomorrow's adults. And if we don't teach our children about what human rights people can expect, not only children, then they are not in a position to be able to demand those rights and to make entitlements. As Sandra mentioned, governments have a responsibility to respect, protect and fulfil human rights. And the World Programme for Human Rights Education and Training and the World Declaration for Human Rights Education tells us that we should teach about human rights so that people can know what their rights are in order to claim them through human rights, which we're already doing through our work on the rights of the child and the ethos and the culture that we create, but also for human rights, so that people can actually come together and make demands that their rights are met, to support our active citizens and people, full members of the community in future.
Nicola?
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I think really the main thing I would want to say on this, Kate has captured it so well there, is that I think the human rights approach is really important. If for no other reason than the fact that in the Equality Act there were supposed to be 10 protected characteristics and poverty was the 10th, and that was removed by, I believe, the Conservative government. I don't think any of us will be surprised that they've removed that. And I think we can all think why they might have removed it, because it would have got rather in their way of imposed austerity. And we should be clear that austerity was a choice and not a necessity. So if poverty had been included in the Equality Act as the 10th protected characteristic, it had the potential to make a great deal of difference to people living in poverty in this country and to children in particular living in poverty. So it was a great misfortune that was able to happen at all. And I think the fact that if we're looking at it from a more human rights perspective, that perhaps helps to ameliorate the ground that was lost and the rights that were lost as a result of that omission. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Nicola. Just one other point that's come up, part of a question about how schools and teachers can sensitively engage with families around this. I wonder, would Sandra and Gillian have anything in particular to contribute in response to that question about sensitive engagement with families on the issue?
Is it okay if I come in on this one first?
Yes, sure.
I'm just actually looking at the chat here as well, and I just saw something from Belle Houston that actually made me think about the importance of communicating to families that as a school we're on their side. And the conversations are really, really delicate because of the issues of stigma and shame. And I think key to this is taking the position of helping parents to access their entitlements. It's not a case of parents coming to the school and begging for help. It's presenting as a core service, core to the work of the school, presenting what parents need to get help to get what they are entitled to as citizens. And what Bella Houston have done, and you may have seen this in the chat, is brought in the services of a welfare rights advisor, a financial inclusion advisor. And that's been really, really successful in helping parents access the entitlements up to, I think Bella Houston helped parents access about £190,000 last session. And so it's not about waiting for, you know, the needy, the so-called deserving poor to beg for some crumbs from the king's table. It's presenting people with what's rightfully theirs.
Gillian, anything to add?
Yeah, and just adding to Sandra's point, I was also struck with the comment in the chat around the work at Bella Houston, but I was also struck by Nicola's words about hiding. And teachers and school staff know their young people, they know their young people really well, they're closer to them than, you know, us in the development of this programme, but sometimes we can all make assumptions and young people become masters at that hiding. And Nicola, I didn't write it, I wasn't quick enough in the chat, but your telling of your personal story and you know, you were talking about the door and the hiding. And I think one of the strengths of this programme is the opportunities for teachers to come together to reflect and to share, and sometimes on those kind of assumptions. And where it is a really sensitive or challenging conversation that sometimes we don't know the best way to have it, one of the powers of this kind of learning is that you're not alone and that you can have those conversations with others about how to engage and support families in that sensitive way that Sandra described really well.
Okay, thanks very much to everyone for that. There are a few comments and questions in the chat which we will pick up and respond to later, but we are really pretty tight for time, so I'm going to move us on for now. I'd already said that we'll send out an email with the various links that you'll need to access what's already online that would allow you to learn a bit more about PACT and allow you to access some of the self-access resources that are already there. And it will also provide information about the dates for the forthcoming module series, which will begin, will resume at the end of October and continue right through until the beginning of December. And after that is done, what PACT will be doing by way of next steps is evaluating the work with a view to finessing the materials, making sure that they are, you know, that they're as good and strong as they can possibly be and as current as they can be. And we will also be bearing in mind that primary objective that we had of providing face-to-face learning, and we still want to be able to do that when public health conditions will allow it. So that's our intention moving forward. In the meantime, though, we would ask that all of you in your respective professional roles, please to raise awareness about what we're trying to do. So as we await the development of a vaccine for COVID-19, we can see the power of PACT professional learning to act, by no means as a vaccine against poverty, but as a significant mitigator of its symptoms in our schools. In the context of COVID, PACT PL has much to offer schools and teachers as they do their bit in fighting the virus and in fighting against poverty. And these couple of clips that we're going to show you from the General Secretary and the Deputy First Minister underline the importance of PACT in the here and now. Remember, it was envisaged in 2017, but the importance of it is absolutely paramount right here in the here and now.
I think the importance of the PACT project in a post-COVID environment will be even more essential than it might have been otherwise. The experience of the last 6 months through lockdown, through the ongoing impact of COVID, have revealed a deep fault line in our society around the issue of poverty, and that's manifested itself in terms of the lives of young people. We saw during lockdown the digital inequity that created a barrier, a further barrier for many young people. And we know that children in poorer families are more likely to have been traumatised significantly during the COVID restrictions. We know that poorer families have suffered disproportionately just directly from the impact of COVID as an infection, a disease. So there will be significant increased challenges around poverty and not just attainment, but also just school experience, health and well-being for young people. The PACT project therefore has even more relevance, I think, post-COVID than would otherwise have been the case, and its launch is, I think, fortuitous in that sense. Its need, or the need for it, will be even greater.
Professional learning is at the heart of the constant work to improve the quality of education within Scotland, and teachers as professionals are wholly supportive and signed up to that objective. So the PACT resources are a tremendous asset in taking forward that agenda to deliver excellence and equity for all of our learners, which lies at the heart of education policy in Scotland. And I'm delighted that we're going to have such a contribution from the PACT resources to that work on excellence and equity.
So before we bring today's event to a close with a poem, I'd like to thank our speakers, Gillian Hamilton, Nicola Fisher, Kate Laughlin and Sandra Scott. I'd like to thank all those who contributed to the homemade film clips, those that we saw today and those that will be on the PACT zone of the EIS website any minute now. And can I thank also the EIS staff who have been working behind the scenes in preparation for today and who've been managing the tech for us this afternoon. It hasn't always been entirely on our side. It's quite a challenge to do this kind of thing. I'm sure you'll appreciate, but we've got there in the end. And thanks very much to all of you for your patience, maybe with some of the little glitches. Lee and Pauline, you have been amazing. And finally, thank you very much to all of you who've made time to be here this afternoon. I know that everyone's incredibly busy, so we really appreciate you being here. And let me also express our appreciation in advance for the support that we hope that you will be able to give to the project going forward and beyond today. So we're going to finish with a poem by Morena Roberts, a poet, researcher and campaigner on poverty and human rights, who sadly died earlier this year. But we are grateful for the permission to share this with you today and hope you find it inspiring. And the poem's going to be read by Anna Bradley.
All people, all human. I'm telling the people with power that I have power too. If you stifle my voice and deny me a choice, I will show my power to you. I will not come with a weapon. I will not come in fear. I will come with others as sisters and brothers, and a voice you will have to hear. I'm telling the people with knowledge that I have knowledge too. If you ignore my words and deny what you've heard, my knowledge will be lost to you. I will not come in anger. I will not come in pain. I will come as me, with dignity, and your denial will be to your shame. I'm telling the people with control that I have control too. If you put me in chains, then hatred reigns, and fear gains control of you. I will not come as a prisoner. I will not come broken to you. I will come with pride and stand by your side, because I am human too.
Thank you very much, Anna, and we'll leave you with those words, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Goodbye. Have a lovely weekend. And those of you who are lucky enough to have an October break on the horizon, enjoy all of it as much as you can. Okay, bye, everyone.